The biggest lie we've been told about medieval builders is that they were guessing, that they were primitive, that everything before concrete and steel was trial and error. Engineers today are quietly admitting something uncomfortable. Some medieval construction methods were so effective, so durable, and so self-sustaining that they actually outperformed modern techniques. And instead of being improved, many of them were banned, abandoned, or replaced by faster profit-driven systems. On ancient roots uncovered, we're pulling back the curtain. These weren't accidents. These were engineered masterpieces hiding in plain sight. Stone without cement that still won't fall. Medieval dry stone construction looks simple until you realize it defies modern logic. No mortar, no glue. Just stone stacked on stone, balanced so precisely that walls have survived earthquakes, floods, and centuries of freeze-thaw cycles. Engineers now understand why. These walls flex, they move. Instead of cracking under stress like modern rigid concrete, they absorb energy and settle back into place. Dry stone structures naturally drain water, preventing rot and internal pressure. They were eventually restricted because they were slow to build and required extreme skill. Skill doesn't scale well in an industrial economy. Speed does. Timber frames that breathe instead of rot. You know, before modern houses were sealed tight like plastic containers, medieval timber frame buildings were well alive. Thick wooden beams carried the load, while walls were allowed to breathe. Moisture moved through the structure instead of being trapped inside it. That breathing action prevented mold, decay, and structural fatigue. Modern engineers now spend billions trying to fix moisture problems medieval builders never had. Timber framing fell out of favour because it required master carpenters and long seasoning times for wood. Industry didn't want patience. It wanted volume. Lime mortar that heals itself. Now, here's one that really stings modern construction. Back in medieval times, lime mortar could actually heal cracks all on its own. So, when tiny fractures formed, water would activate unreacted lime particles, which then recrystallized and sealed the damage. Now, modern cement, well, it does quite the opposite. Once it cracks, that's it. It's done. Lime mortar, on the other hand, was flexible, breathable, and, you know, actually compatible with stone. Portland cement, which was introduced later, turned out to be harder and faster, but it slowly destroys historic buildings by trapping moisture and stressing the stone. Lime mortar wasn't banned because it failed. No, it was sidelined simply because it didn't fit factory timelines. Thatched roofing that outperformed tiles. You know, thatch often gets mocked as flammable and fragile, but actually engineers now know that properly installed thatched roofs are, well, thermal beasts. They insulate better than many modern materials, keeping interiors cool in summer and warm in winter. They also shed water efficiently and with proper maintenance can last 40 to 60 years. The real problem wasn't performance, honestly. It was control. Thatch just couldn't be standardized or mass-produced. Fire regulations and insurance companies helped push it out, even though by that time stone hearths and chimney design had already reduced fire risk dramatically. You know, medieval foundations had a knack for floating rather than sinking. Modern buildings, well, they often crack because their foundations are fighting against the soil. But those medieval builders, they really worked with the land instead of against it. In places with marshy or unstable ground, medieval builders used timber rafts, layered stone and compacted organic materials to spread the weight out evenly. It's honestly quite ingenious when you think about it. Some medieval structures, believe it or not, still stand today on ground that modern engineers once called impossible. These clever methods, though, were set aside when standardized concrete footings became the norm. Concrete, sure, it's predictable on paper, but medieval foundations, well, they were adaptable in reality. Guess which one lasts longer when the ground shifts? Thick walls that regulated temperature naturally. Medieval walls weren't thin, they were massive. Stone and earth walls acted as thermal batteries, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night. This kept interiors stable without any mechanical systems. Modern engineers now call this thermal mass, and you know, they actually try to recreate it with expensive materials. Medieval builders were doing it effortlessly. These walls disappeared when land became expensive, and thinner walls meant more sellable space. Comfort, well, it was lost to profit margins. Wattle and daub that outlived modern drywall. Wattle and daub sounds fragile until you realize many examples have lasted hundreds of years. Flexible wooden lattices filled with earth-based mixtures created walls that resisted cracking during movement and temperature changes. Modern drywall cracks, moulds and needs constant replacement. Wattle and daub was, you know, repairable, biodegradable and locally sourced. It vanished when industrial materials flooded the market and local knowledge was, well, dismissed as backward. Engineers now admit the system was, surprisingly, shockingly resilient. The uncomfortable truth is this. Medieval builders weren't just guessing. They were observing, really paying attention. They tested materials over generations. And they optimized for longevity, not just quarterly profits. You know, many of these methods were quietly phased out, not because they failed, but because they simply couldn't be rushed, patented, or mass-produced. Modern engineering is finally circling back. Breathable walls, flexible foundations, self-healing materials, sustainable insulation. These are being marketed as cutting-edge innovations. Medieval builders were already there. If this changed how you see the past, you're exactly why Ancient Roots Uncovered exists. Subscribe for more forgotten knowledge that still shapes our world. Share this with someone who thinks history is boring. And remember, sometimes the future is hidden in the past.